Last year's historic election turnout seemed to prove that local voting measures were a success. Even in the face of a pandemic, voting was up almost 7% from 4 years ago. And as Governor Greg Abbott pointed out, evidence of widespread fraud is non-existent. Still, Republican legislators like Senator Paul Bettencourt, who appeared with Abbott in a press conference on voting in Houston, this week introduced a slate of bills that aim for election integrity. But in practice, they require more paperwork for those with disabilities to vote by mail, prohibit extended early voting hours for shift workers, and end drive-through voting, among other rules. Anthony Gutierrez of the nonpartisan voting rights group Common Cause Texas says what these bills are really designed to do is suppress the votes of minorities, but in reality, they will suppress the votes of all Texans.
When you consider that we are perpetually last or close to last in turnout in every election, this is not what we need. What we need to be doing in Texas, if we're going to do anything on voting, is finding ways to get more people involved, to get more people participating in our democratic system.
Now, Senator Bettencourt said one of his aims is to standardize rules across all counties. I wanted to ask, some of the things they're pushing right now with SB 7, like doing away with extended hours and drive-through voting and eliminating curbside. Do these measures necessarily target minority or Democratic voters?
These measures do target minority voters, and it really just doesn't make any sense for anyone when you think about it. It's not just minority voters. In a lot of cases, these changes would impact rural voters. Think about one of the provisions that he's talking about would require that every poll site in the county has a standardized number of voting machines, which may sound innocuous, but if you live in some rural county, like in one of the West Texas areas, you'll have a ton of people who all live in the county seat, and then you can drive, 2 hours, still be in the same county, and there's a very sparse population out there. But the poll site in the sparse area and the poll site in the really heavy populated area would now have to have the same number of voting machines, and that means in one area there's not going to be enough, in one area there's going to be way too many. The thing with the standardizing of voting hours across counties, there's a reason those aren't standardized now. There are places where you don't need to keep polls open the maximum number of allowable hours, and there's places where, in Harris County, where they had 24-hour voting. People love that in Harris County because that's one of the only ways you can keep the massive lines from forming. The argument really just makes no sense, especially when you consider how just upset and bitterly opposed the same people like Senator Bettencourt are to the House Resolution 1 that what Congress is currently considering, which would standardize voting in many ways across all states. They are bitterly opposed to that. They're not really just in favor of standardization. They're just in favor of some specific changes that are going to keep people that they don't want to vote from being able to vote easily.
I see. Do you happen to know, Anthony, are there any studies that were done on the number, how much different kinds of voters had to wait in line? There was a real feature of the elections in the last year, these long voting lines. And has there been any studies done on whether minority voters had to wait longer, or is there anything like that?
I don't know of any specific studies off the top of my head, but I can give you one really good example that we've looked into a great deal. And if you look at 2020 elections and specifically the Democratic primary, we all, I think, remember, especially if you're in Houston, the Harris County area, the infamous 8.5 hour line that happened on election day during that March primary. And right after that happened, and this was pre-COVID, so I jumped on Vaughn Lane and went to Houston and got to meet with the election administrator and dug into what happened there? Why were those lines so long? Not just that one, but all over the county you had the same thing. And the problem was exactly what one of these bills is trying to do, trying to standardize the number of voting machines per each precinct in the county. That's exactly what they did. And what ended up happening was in the black and brown parts of Houston, that's where you got these massive lines because of they were trying to standardize the number of poll sites. It was a bad idea then. It's a much worse idea now where they're trying to do it statewide. I don't have a study to point to, but there's about 1 million press stories that came out right after that election that, if you just look at who were the people being interviewed and what parts of town was happening, like, it was very clear who was being most impacted by that.
Okay, right. Okay, now there's many bills in Texas now that are addressing this issue and before the legislature. Can you describe procedurally what's the future of these bills given the makeup of the Senate and the House? Like, what can happen to possibly happen to stop or change them?
Yeah. So there are many bills. So the two biggest ones, Senate Bill 7 and House Bill 6. These were both set for a hearing this week. I'm talking to you on a Monday, and SB 7 was supposed to be heard today. There were some procedural, it's called the tag rule. Some Democrats tagged the bill, meaning it has to be postponed, I think 72 hours. So it may be heard on Thursday. The House bill will be heard on Thursday. I think the odds realistically of stopping these bills in committee is very low, just because of who the bill authors are and how those committees are composed. But once they move beyond that, I think there is a chance. I mean, there are so many people and so many organizations that are upset about the various things in these bills. People, before this bill got postponed, there were a ton of us here in the Capitol. People were showing up to testify and to protest and do press conferences. I think if people really can make enough noise and, call their representatives, call their senators, and just let them know, hey, this is not a problem. This thing that you're trying to address, like, this isn't a problem this isn't a solution to any actual problem that we're facing. And we're facing a lot of problems. Like, we still need to fix our power grid and fix ERCOT. There's still COVID problems that people need to fix. And then there's the long list of other things that, we've needed to fix for years, like public education and healthcare. Like, working on tweaking voting things so that one party can stay in power is not something that should be taken a priority over all those real problems.
For the People's News, this is John Moeller reporting.